Welcome to Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk. This program is an outpouring of the ministry going on at Calvary Chapel, Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Here's what's coming up in today's message.
When the chief shepherd, Jesus Christ, shall appear, then you will receive a crown that fades not away. What's interesting to me is these words, feed the flock of God. It's the exact same words as shepherd the sheep. That's the words. Shepherd the sheep of God. Be caregivers to the sheep. And that's the idea of this is a description of what it means to be a shepherd, to care for them, to be an example to them. You do it because you want to, with a ready mind. If you don't have a care for the sheep, then you shouldn't be a shepherd.
When a shepherd looks after his sheep, he'll do anything to protect them from harm's way. Today, Pastor Dan says if you're a believer, you must look out for the non-believer like a shepherd to a sheep. Jesus is the good shepherd. Let me say it again. Jesus is the good shepherd. He came to die for you to give you a chance to have a relationship with his Father. He loves you so much. Wouldn't it be unloving to keep this love to yourself? God came to you on the way to someone else. Share his love today. Now here's Pastor Dan in the book of Colossians chapter 4 with today's edition of Believing the Word.
What should be our relationship with them? Take a look at verse 7. He'll begin to talk about some of the people that are either currently with him in Rome or people that have been with him in Rome, traveling back and forth, delivering letters and such. So verse 7, all my state shall Tychicus declare unto you, who is a beloved brother and a faithful minister, and he's a fellow servant in the Lord, whom I have sent unto you for the same purpose, that he might know your estate and comfort your hearts. So there's an exchange that Paul's hoping for here as Tychicus goes to the Colossians and they just exchange reports of each other. Tychicus himself was from Asia Minor, and so that's where Colossae is. Paul's going to send him over there with this letter really close to where his home is. But there's a certain comfort, as it mentions here in verse 8, that comes from just exchanging reports with each other, right? I mean, you hear of what the Lord's doing in another believer's life, and doesn't just encourage you like, yeah, let's do more. Let's do more. You know, the last time you heard of some Christian talk about somebody that got saved, or somebody just went to a conference or some event and really learned something, came back and shared it with you, you know, it just spurs you to want more of that. That's the comfort that their hearts get, like he says in verse 8 out of this. It's sort of like exchanging, you know, prayer requests and then finding out you have things in common. That just happened to me the other day. I have an online prayer meeting I do every now and again, and I shared a prayer request, and a guy from Maine that I know, he's like, yeah, I can relate. And I was like, yeah, wow, you can, cool. I'm not weird, you know. But it kind of gives you that assurance, like, yeah, we're okay. Yeah, let's keep going. It's that comfort to know we're on the same page together. We're in the same fight together. Let's keep going, you know. They want to exchange reports. Have you ever met a soldier that, you know, you had to bug him to write a letter home to his bride? It doesn't work that way, right? He wants to write a letter home to his bride. And that's the idea. That's the drive behind this. I'm going to send Tychicus to you, and he's going to tell you about us, and you could tell him about your condition and get word back to us. And they want to hear from each other. There's a passion in these people's exchanges. But all of the words Paul uses, he's a beloved brother. He's a faithful servant, verse 7. He's a fellow servant. He's a worker. What a complimentary way to talk about this guy. Not just do we love him, but he's a hard worker. I do love the fact that as we go through these verses 7 through 14, many of the words that are going to be used is words of work, that they've been working together. They're fellow laborers, they're ministers, they're servants. There's so many words in here that talk about how they're doing things. They're doing things together. They're not just stagnant, but they're actually trying to affect people. And so let's continue now, verse 9. There's more people here. So he's going to send Tychicus, but also in verse 9 it says, with him I'm going to send Onesimus, a faithful and beloved brother who is one of you. they shall make known unto you all things which are done here, meaning here in Rome. So it's Tychicus and it's Onesimus that are going back to the Colossian church to deliver this letter, this very letter that we're reading to them. This Onesimus, do you know this name? This is the slave from the book of Philemon that we're going to get to. There's a little tweet of a note that we're going to read here later on. It's one chapter, 25 verses. Paul writes a letter to Onesimus's boss, his slave owner. He was an indentured servant. Paul writes a letter to Philemon on behalf of this Onesimus. And we'll get to that when we get to the book of Philemon, but the idea is that Onesimus ran away. He's like, I don't want this life anymore. He ran away. Well, while he was in Rome with Paul, he got saved. And now Paul is sending Tychicus back with this letter. Oh, and he's sending Onesimus back too, to his master. So this is what the gospel did in Onesimus's heart. It converted him and said, yeah, I owe him. I need to go back and submit to him. And so Onesimus, this runaway slave, is going to go back to his boss, Philemon, who lived there at Colossae in this very city. And look at the way Paul talks about him in verse 9. He's a faithful and beloved brother. And he's one of you. He's a Colossian like you. They're going to make known to you what all the things that have been done here. So I just love that Paul recommends him. Paul says, look, he's been a faithful helper to me. You need to consider that when you're considering his punishment for running away, that he has been a faithful and beloved helper here in Rome. And now there's more people in verse 10. Verse 10, it says here, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, salutes you, and also Marcus. And then it says Marcus is the sister's son to Barnabas. So that just is a way of saying that Marcus is Barnabas's nephew. We know them from in the book of Acts. We'll get to that in just a second. But he says, Aristarchus, my fellow servant, salutes you, and also Marcus, who's the nephew of Barnabas, concerning whom you received commandments, that if he comes unto you, you should receive him. And then verse 11, and also another man whose name is Jesus, but he goes by the nickname Justus, who are of the circumcision. That means they're Jews. These only are my fellow workers unto the kingdom of God, which have been a comfort to me. So now we have a list of 3 more guys here. Aristarchus, I love the fact that Aristarchus says here that he was a fellow prisoner. He was in trouble with Paul in Rome. I mean, this is one of the guys that didn't shy away from getting right into the pit in the trouble, right? Like, oh, you're doing a project? I'm coming too, right? That's a brother you want. That's the type of friend you want to have with you. And this guy did also travel extensively with Paul. We read about him in the book of Acts and otherwise. But man, it's one thing to be a fellow laborer with Paul, but then when you read this one's a fellow prisoner with me, that's a brother. That's a brother that's right there with you. Man, I pray we all have somebody like that. But now it mentions Mark in verse 10. This Mark, he is the author of the Gospel of Mark that we've read through the Gospel of Mark. He will eventually write the Gospel of Mark after this time. But remember, this is the Mark that lost favor with Paul. He went on the first missionary trip with Paul and Barnabas. Barnabas, his uncle, Mark's uncle. And then at the end of that trip, Paul and Barnabas wanted to go back and revisit the places they had gone to. But because Mark had left the first trip early, Paul didn't want to take Mark with him. But Barnabas, Mark's uncle, said, no, Mark, come on, Mark is good. Mark's faithful. And they split. Barnabas and Paul split over this issue, and they went different directions because Paul didn't believe he could trust Mark back then. And now here we find Mark listed right here in Rome with Paul, and he's commending Mark to these Colossians, saying, and it's just so neat to see that Mark has been restored. This split that Paul and Barnabas had about what they should do about Mark, it's been resolved. It wasn't some earth-shaking thing that is not resolvable. We need to look at our conflicts that way. That when there's a difference of opinion, or I don't know if I could trust him, he kind of flaked out. Let's try to work through these things. And we see that Paul did. Paul did work through these things, and now he's in a place where he not only trusts Mark's with him there in Rome doing the work. I love that. In fact, Mark kind of goes from this place of Paul saying, no, I'm not taking him. I don't trust him. To now here, he says, receive Mark. He's been with me here doing the work. Receive him when he gets there to Colossae. Later, we'll read in 2 Timothy, which is one of the very last things Paul ever wrote, when Paul was on death row and at the very, very end. And in that letter, in 2 Timothy, Paul actually calls Mark profitable. Mark is profitable to me. And so this full restoration of that relationship, we should strive for that. We should strive for that. Don't look at any lapse in judgment or breaks in fellowship as something that's permanent. Look at it as something that, okay, we need to work through that. Let's come through this. Let's improve it. Let's come back into full fellowship. I love that we have that example here with Mark. And even to a certain extent, Onesimus. That Onesimus was this runaway slave, and now he's also going back. The Lord's done a work in his heart. He's changed, and he's coming back. He's going to do the hard, right thing and come back. So Mark and Onesimus, just some great, great stories here. It also mentions this Jesus whose nickname is Justice in verse 11. We don't know much about him. Next topic. Okay. No, that's all we know. But isn't that neat to know that this man did something in his life? He showed this faithfulness to Paul to get his name written in the permanent Word of God. I mean, that's neat. I don't care if it's just a mention of my name. That would be great, to know that for all of eternity, my name got listed in the book. That would be cool. I don't care that it doesn't say anything about me. My name's in the book. This Justice is in heaven right now. Like, I made the book. Like, what does it say about you? Nothing, but I made the book. I love that. I'm sure this Justice is excited in heaven. But there's a word here used I want to point out. There's something interesting. At the end of verse 11, when it talked about these three men, Aristarchus and Marcus and Justus, it says at the end of verse 11 that they have been a comfort to me. And I just want to point that out because this is not the typical word comfort, which is the word paraclete, like Holy Spirit will be a comfort, which means to invite near. That's not what this word is. This is a really rare word here at the end of verse 11 where it says that they have been a comfort to me. And it's the word paraagoria. So it's not paraclete, like to call out. It's paraagoria. Agoria kind of comes from the idea of working. It's the Greek word. We actually get the word agriculture from it. But it's the word to work. Industriously work. Let me see if I have the exact thing here. Industriously gather like a marketplace. So he's saying here of these three guys, they have been a comfort to me. These guys have been working with me. They're right there doing the work. They're not just the guys that show up after the work and be like, oh, thanks for doing the work. Can I get you a sandwich? No, these are the guys that were doing the work with Paul. And that's the comfort. It's one thing to have people that will comfort you after the fact. It's another thing to have people that are comforting you by going through it with you. Do you know what that's like? To have somebody that's willing to say, okay, you're moving? Yeah, I'll be there. What time are you starting? 10 a.m.? Okay, I'll be there. I'll help you lift the couch. I'll help you do the thing, whatever. That's a different kind of comfort altogether, right? Not just the guy that shows up that night and says, oh, can I bring you a pizza? When you're done, the guy that says, what time are you starting? I'll be there. That's these three guys. That's what Paul is commending of them, that they comforted me. They were there when I needed them. I love that. Verse 12, there's a few more guys here. Verse 12 says, there's Epaphras. He is one of you, meaning he's a Colossian, but he's here in Rome. Epaphras, he's one of you. He's a servant of Christ. He salutes you, always laboring fervently for you in prayer, that you may stand perfect and complete in all the will of God. For I bear him record that he has a great zeal for you, and also them of Laodicea, which is another city real close to Colossae, right? And also of them of Hierapolis, another city that's within 4 miles. These three cities, Colossae, Laodicea, and Hierapolis, are very, very close to each other in modern southwestern Turkey. And so he's talking about Epaphras and how he's with me here, and he has a zeal for you Colossians. He wants you Colossians to continue to grow and know who Christ is. You might remember this Epaphras from chapter 1 of this book, because in chapter 1 of Colossians, it talks about how this Epaphras, he is the pastor of the church at Colossae, but right now he's here in Rome with Paul. He's visiting Paul there. So the ministry of the pastors is to complete the saints, to grow the Christians in wisdom and in character. And this Epaphras has the zeal to do that. He wants that for them. And Paul recognizes that in him, that this Epaphras, your pastor Epaphras, he wants the best for you. And he's coming back on this trip with Tychicus and Onesimus and these other guys that are getting ready to come. Epaphras is coming too. And Paul points out, this guy really has a zeal for you. You know, like, wouldn't that be weird if I stood up here and I said to you, like, look, I really have a zeal for you. I really want to help you. That's kind of weird. But if somebody visiting comes that knows me and says to you, hey, listen, your pastor, he really wants the best for you. Doesn't that sound so much different? And that's what Paul's doing for this Colossian pastor. He's saying to his flock, look, your pastor, he really does care for you. He's really trying to help you guys. And so just commending him in that way, what a joy to hear that. And that's what a pastor's job is, to have that zeal and help and to try to build up the other believers. This is the way it says it, Paul said it in Ephesians chapter 4, that the pastors and the teachers are there for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry. They're in the work too. And for the edifying of the body of Christ, until we all come in the unity of the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God unto a perfect or complete person, until the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. See, there's a growing process. We're all in this growing process. And that is Epaphras' job, to help these Colossians to continue to grow. And Paul says he's doing good at that. He's really trying to help you guys. Notice in verse 13, though, it said in verse 13 about him, I bear him record that he has great zeal, and not just for those at Colossae, but also for these other local groups of Christians and these other churches. Just recognize that a shepherd doesn't just teach. A pastor doesn't just teach. He's a shepherd. He cares and he helps. This Epaphras had an effect on many of the churches around, and that can often be at great expense. I bear him record that he has a great zeal for you. That's passion. You can't fabricate passion. You either have it or you don't, right? This is the way Peter said it about pastors, I want to say. Peter described it this way: feed the flock of God, which is among you. And we can read, well, let me read the rest of it, and then I'll make a point. Peter's advice was talking to pastors, feed the flock of God, which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly. Don't do it for money, but do it because you have a ready mind that you want to do it. Neither as being lords over God's heritage, but do it as being an example to them. And when the chief shepherd, Jesus Christ, shall appear, then you will receive a crown that fades not away. But what's interesting to me is these words, feed the flock of God. It's the exact same words as shepherd the sheep. That's the words. Shepherd the sheep of God. Be caregivers to the sheep. And that's the idea of this is a description of what it means to be a shepherd, to care for them, to be an example to them. You do it because you want to, with a ready mind. If you don't have a care for the sheep, then you shouldn't be a shepherd. If you're only doing it for the money or something else, how foolish is that? And so this Epaphras, he was a great example to them of what a pastor should be. He wasn't a hireling. Jesus gives this whole great chapter in John chapter 10 about how he's the good shepherd. And then he says, don't follow a hireling. A hireling is just in it for the money, and when the wolves come, they leave because they're just there for the money. But he says, I'm not like that. I'm not a hireling that's going to flee at trouble, and neither should a pastor be a hireling that's just there for the money. Right? Verse 14 ends this section here. There's one more person he brings up. Luke, the beloved physician, or two more people. Luke, the beloved physician, and also Demas greet you. Now this Luke, this is another one of the authors of a gospel. Luke is the only Gentile that wrote a book of the New Testament. He wrote the Gospel of Luke. Altogether, there's 8 men that we just looked at that are here with Paul. 2 of them will end up writing Gospels, Mark and Luke. Luke is the eventual author of the Gospel of Luke. Interesting that he mentions Demas here. He only mentions a short little also that Demas is here. That's it. Luke is with me and also Demas is with me. He's not ignoring the fact that Demas is there, but he just says that they send greetings. This Demas, later on, we'll read in Paul's last letter that he wrote, 2 Timothy, we'll read how Paul says that Demas has forsaken me. And so we have the opposite, with some of these people earlier, like Mark. Mark has come back into fellowship, right? Now we have Demas, where later on in Paul's latest letter, 2 Timothy, he says, Demas has forsaken me. Here at this point in the ministry, Demas is still there with Paul in Rome, but he doesn't have much to say about him. He just says, Demas greets you. What I find interesting about this is there's never any judgment of anyone's soul. Paul doesn't come out and say, later on when Demas forsakes him in 2 Timothy, Paul doesn't say, yes, this Demas has forsaken me and now he's headed to hell. There's nothing like that in there. There's always this hope that somebody can come back. It's dragnet, right? Just the facts, ma'am. Demas has forsaken me. That's what happened. I don't know what's going to happen with Demas. God knows. But what I know is Demas has forsaken me. And you know what that does in our hearts? It leaves us open to the fact that, look, I don't know what's happening with Demas. All I know is he forsook me. He left. He gave up. But I don't know what's happening with him. I don't know what God's going to do with him. And that leaves the door open for you or somebody else to go minister and help and bring them back, just like Mark came back. One of the biggest things I take away from this section, verse 7 through 14, is leave the door open. Don't be kicking doors shut and keeping people out of our lives. Don't be, judge people on their fruit. Demas has forsaken me. I'm judging his fruit. He just forsook me. But don't judge their soul. Don't look at somebody and say, yeah, they're headed for hell. You could say, this is what happened, and they're on a bad path. But don't ever give up on somebody. Even with this Demas, Paul never does. And we don't know. We don't know maybe what happened in Demas's life after he forsook Paul. But we know that there are others that came back, like Mark. It's the same for our lives. Don't give up on people. Do you have somebody you're still praying about after a long time? Okay. Maybe they've forsaken you right now. Okay. Well, I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe they're going to get restored like Mark. Pray that way. Pray that way. Ask the Lord for that. Let's go to the next one, verse 15. Because you know what? There's people beyond our circle. We've thought about unbelievers in the first couple of verses. We've thought about the believers that are with us, sort of like our own circle of people that are with Paul. And now Paul actually ends the chapter by now talking about some others. Other believers outside of his circle. People that are there in Colossae. People that are in other places that he hasn't met. Let's go to the last point here. Also to build the kingdom, not just our believers, not just comforting our believers, not just be committed to our friends, but also be accepting and be open towards the fact that there's many more out there. Are there any other churches in Chambersburg that are preaching the gospel today? Do you think? Maybe? Yes, there are, okay? There are other believers in the very town that we're in right now. Let's recognize that, okay? We're not the only ones. Elijah had that problem. Do you remember that in the Old Testament? Elijah's like, I tried to do your work, but nobody cares. Nobody listens. And God had to remind him, there are other people out there serving me right now that haven't bent the knee to Baal in that case. And so this is a great little reminder as he closes the book that there are more people out there. And let's be careful that we recognize that so that we treat them right and we don't have some weird contention with other good believers.
You've been listening to Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk. Pastor Dan's going through Colossians. In this New Testament book of Colossians, we learn that the deity of Jesus was under attack. So what does Paul do? He faces the heresy head on because this was serious business and couldn't be ignored. Paul reminds the Christians in Colossae of the authority and sufficiency Christ brings to the table, to your table and mine. How we see God is how we live our life. If we're not sold out on His provision and power, how will that affect our daily tasks? Does our faith drive our decisions? Is our relationship with Jesus transforming our lives and those around us? As you take time to ponder these questions, we trust that this self-reflection will bring you closer to Jesus and inspire a deeper connection with your Creator. Would you consider sharing your thoughts about today's message with us? If so, you can reach us by calling 717-500-1102. Once again, that's 717-500-1102. We look forward to hearing from you. If you enjoyed this message today and would like to listen to more teachings, we have what you need at cchambersburg.org. There you'll notice the Media tab, which will take you to all the teachings we have. You can also download our app to listen to these messages from anywhere. Again, that's cchambersburg.org. Thanks for listening to this teaching from Colossians. This has been Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk.